The 100 Dresses. Wanda. Today, Monday, Wanda Petrunsky was not in her seat, but nobody, not even Peggy and Madeline, the girls who started all the fun, noticed her absence. Usually Wanda sat in the next to the last seat in the last row in room 13. She sat in the corner of the room where the rough boys who did not make good marks on their report cards sat. The corner of the room where there was most scuffling of feet, most roars of laughter when anything funny was said, and most mud and dirt on the floor. Wanda did not sit there because she was rough and noisy. On the contrary, she was very quiet and rarely said anything at all. Nobody had ever heard her laugh out loud. Sometimes she twisted her mouth into a crooked sort of smile, but that was all. Nobody knew exactly why Wanda sat in that seat, unless it was because she came all the way from Boggins Heights, and her feet were usually caked with dry mud that she picked up coming down the country roads. Maybe the teacher liked to keep all the children who were apt to come in with dirty shoes in one corner of the room. But no one really thought much about Wanda Petrunsky once she was in the classroom. The time they thought about her was outside of school hours, at noontime when they were coming back to school, or in the morning early before school began, when groups of 2 or 3 or even more would be talking and laughing on their way to the schoolyard. Then sometimes they waited for Wanda to have fun with her. The next day, Tuesday, Wanda was not in school either, and nobody noticed her absence again, except the teacher and probably Big Bill Byron, who sat in the seat behind Wanda's, and who could now put his long legs around her empty desk, one on each side, and sit there like a frog, to the great entertainment of all in his corner of the room. But on Wednesday, Peggy and Maddie, who sat in front row along with the other children who got good marks and didn't drag in a whole lot of mud, didn't notice that Wanda wasn't there. Peggy was the most popular girl in school. She was pretty. She had many pretty clothes in her auburn hair was curly. Maddie was her closest friend. The reason Peggy and Maddie noticed Wanda's absence was because Wanda had made them late to school. They had waited and waited for Wanda to have some fun with her, and she just hadn't come. They kept thinking she'd come any minute. They saw Jack Bagels running to school, his necktie askew and his cap at a precarious tilt. They knew it must be late, for he always managed to slide into his chair exactly when the doorbell rang, as though he were making a touchdown. Still, they waited 1 minute more and 1 minute more, hoping she'd come. But finally they had to race off without seeing her. The two girls reached their classroom after the doors had been closed. The children were reciting in unison the Gettysburg Address, for that was the way Miss Mason always began the session. Peggy and Maddie slipped into their seat just as the class was saying the last lines. That this dead shall not have died in vain, that the nation shall, under God, have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The dresses game. After Peggy and Maddie stopped feeling like intruders in a class that had already begun, they looked across the room and noticed that Wanda was not in her seat. Furthermore, her desk was dusty and looked as though she hadn't been there yesterday either. Come to think of it, they hadn't seen her yesterday. They had waited for her a little while but had forgotten about her when they reached school. They often waited for Wanda Petrunsky to have fun with her. Wanda lived away up on Boggins Heights, and Boggins Heights was no place to live. It was a good place to go and pick wild flowers in the summer, but you always held your breath till you got safely past old man Svensson's yellow house. People in the town said old man Svensson was no good. He didn't work, and, worse still, his house and yard were disgracefully dirty, with the rusty tin cans strewn about and even an old straw hat. He lived alone with his dog and his cat. No wonder, said the people of the town, who'd live with him? And many stories circulated about him. And the stories were the kind that made people scurry past his house even in broad daylight and hope not to meet him. Beyond Svensson's there were a few small scattered frame houses, and in one of these Wanda Petronsky lived with her father and her brother Jake. Wanda Petronsky. Most of the children in room 13 didn't have names like that. They had names easy to say, like Thomas, Smith, or Ellen. There was one boy named Bounce, Willie Bounce, and people thought that was funny. Not funny in the same way that Petronsky was. Wanda didn't have any friends. She came to school alone and went home alone. She always wore a faded blue dress that didn't hang right. It was clean, but it looked as though it had never been ironed properly. She didn't have any friends, but a lot of girls talked to her. They waited for her under the maple trees on the corner of Oliver Street, or they surrounded her in the schoolyard as she stood watching some little girls play hopscotch on the worn, hard ground. Wanda, Peggy would say in a most courteous manner, as though she were talking to Miss Mason, or to the principal perhaps. Wanda, she'd say, gave one of her friends a nudge. Tell us, how many dresses did you say you had hanging up in your closet? 100, said Wanda. 100, exclaimed the older girls incredulously. And the little girls would stop playing hopscotch and listen. Yeah, 100, all lined up, said Wanda. Then her thin lips drew together in silence. What are they like? All silk, I bet, said Peggy. Yeah, all silk, all colors. Velvet too? Yeah, velvet too. 100 dresses, repeated Wanda stolidly. All lined up in my closet. Then they'd let her go. And then before she'd gone very far, they couldn't help bursting into shrieks and purrs of laughter. 100 dresses. Obviously, the only dress Wanda had was the blue one she wore every day. So what did she say she had 100 for? What a story! And the girls laughed derisively, while Wanda moved over to the sunny place by the ivy-covered brick wall of the school building, where she usually stood and waited for the bell to ring. But if the girls had met her at the corner of Oliver Street, they'd carry her along with them for a way, stopping every few feet for more incredulous questions. And it wasn't always dresses they talked about. Sometimes it was hats or a coat or even shoes. How many shoes did you say you had? 60. 60? 60 pairs or 60 shoes? 60 pairs, all lined up in my closet. Yesterday you said 50. Now I got 60. Cries of exaggerated politeness greeted this. All alike? Said the girls. Oh no, every pair is different, all colors, all lined up. And Wanda would shift her eyes quickly from Peggy to a distant spot, as though she were looking far ahead, looking but not seeing anything. Then the outer fringe of the crowd of girls would break away gradually, laughing, and little by little in pairs the group would disperse. Peggy, who had thought up this game, and Maddie, her inseparable friend, were always the last to leave. And finally, Wanda would move up the street, her eyes stirred and her mouth closed tight, hitching her left shoulder every now and then in the funny way she had. Finishing the walk to school alone. Peggy was not really cruel. She protected the small children from bullies, and she cried for hours if she saw an animal mistreated. If anybody had this said to her, "Don't you think that is a cruel way to treat Wanda?" she would have been very surprised. Cruel? What did the girl want to go and say she had 100 dresses for? Anybody could tell that was a lie. Why did she want to lie? And she wasn't just an ordinary person. Else why would she have a name like that? Anyway, they never made her cry. As for Maddie, this business of asking Wanda every day now how many dresses and how many hats and how many this and that she had was bothering her. Maddie was poor herself. She usually wore somebody's hand-me-down clothes. Thank goodness she didn't live up on Boggin's Heights or have a funny name, and her forehead didn't shine the way Wanda's round one did. What did she use on it? Sapolino? That's what all the girls wanted to know. Sometimes when Peggy was asking Wanda those questions in the mock polite voice, Maddie felt embarrassed and studied the marbles in the palm of her hand, rolling them around and saying nothing herself. Not that she felt sorry for Wanda exactly. She would never had paid any attention to Wanda if Peggy hadn't invented the dresses game. But suppose Peggy and all the others started in on her next. She wasn't as poor as Wanda perhaps, but she was poor. Of course she would have more sense than to say 100 dresses. Still, she would not like them to begin on her. Not at all. Oh dear, she did wish Peggy would stop teaching Wanda Petronsky. A bright blue day. Somehow Maddie could not buckle down to work. She sharpened her pencil, turning it around carefully in the little red sharpener, letting the shavings fall in a neat heap on a piece of scrap paper, and trying not to get any of the dust from the lead on her clean arithmetic paper. A slight frown puckered for her forehead. In the first place, she didn't like being late to school, and in the second place, she kept thinking about Wanda. Somehow Wanda's desk, though empty, seemed to be the only thing she saw when she looked over to that side of the room. How had the 100 dresses game begun in the first place? She asked herself impatiently. It was hard to remember the time when they hadn't played that game with Wanda. Hard to think all the way back from now, when the 100 dresses was like the daily dozen to them, when everything seemed much nicer. Oh yes, she remembered. It had begun that day when Cecile first wore her new red dress. Suddenly the whole scene flashed swiftly and vividly from before Wanda's eyes. Was it a bright blue day in September? No, it must have been October, because when she and Peggy were coming to school, arms around each other and singing, Peggy had said, "You know what? This must be the kind of day they mean when they say October's bright blue weather." Maddie remembered that because afterwards it didn't seem like bright blue weather anymore, although the weather had not changed in the slightest. As they turned from shady Oliver Street into Maple, they both blinked, for now the morning sun shone straight in their eyes. Besides that, bright flashes of color came from a group of a half dozen or more girls across the street. Their sweaters and jackets and dresses, blues and golds and reds, and one crimson one in particular, caught the sun's rays like bright pieces of glass. A crisp, fresh wind was blowing, swishing their skirts and blowing their hair in their eyes. The girls were all exclaiming and shouting, and each one was trying to talk louder than the others. Maddie and Peggy joined the group, and the laughing and the talking. Hi, Peg. Hi, Maddie. They were greeted warmly. Look at Cecile. What they were all exclaiming about was the dress that Cecile had on, a crimson dress with cap and socks to match. It was a bright new dress and very pretty. Everyone was admiring it and admiring Cecile. For long, slender Cecile was a toe dancer and wore fancier clothes than most of them, and she had her black stain bag with her precious white satin ballet slippers slung over her shoulders. Today was the day for her dancing lesson. Maddie sat down on the mm, granite, uh, granite curbstone to tie her shoelaces. She listened happily to what they were saying. They all seemed especially jolly today, probably because it was such a bright day. Everything sparkled. Way down at the end of the street, the sun shimmered and turned to silver the blue water of the bay. Maddie picked up a piece of broken mirror and flashed a small circle of light etched with rainbow colors onto the houses, the trees, and the top of the telegraph pole. And it was then that Wanda had come along with her brother Jake.